last thing, I want your acting critique. I'm just gonna play this. I want to get your notes on the portrayal of Dick Cheney here. Okay.
All right, let's get this thing underway.
Scooter, why don't you let everyone know the lay of the land?
Of course, as you all know, I am Scooter Libby, Dick's chief of staff. I'm also his national security advisor and a special advisor to the president.
Technically, Scooter outranks any of Bush's people.
Mary Madeline will serve as counselor to the VP and assistant to Bush. David Addington, Dick's main legal counsel, will play center field on all matters relating to executive power. The president has Alberto Gonzalez, Karl Rove, Karen Hughes as his team. Quite frankly, Gonzalez has no clue. Rove is a hack. Hughes should be in double-A ball. So we will have fairly unobstructed access to the Oval Office. We will be automatically BCC'd on all emails that the president receives or sends, as well as have access to his schedule the second that it is set or changed.
We will also be receiving the daily intelligence briefing before the president. That gets us inside the decision curve.
Which will actually be
First of all, how did Christian Bale do?
I don't know if he did that. He played Scooter. That's not really.
No. Christian Bale's playing Cheney there.
That probably somewhat like Cheney. I mean, you know, it was somewhat convincing. But Cheney didn't say much in this clip.
You haven't seen Vice?
I've seen Vice. Is that the one with? This was the one by Asner or something. Was it the one with? I forgot. What is his name? Dreyfus playing it. What?
Oh no, I think you're thinking of W by Oliver Stone. Yeah, that was
maybe I don't know.
Oh, you haven't seen
Vice? No, I don't believe I've seen Vice.
It's all about Cheney.
Yeah, I know. Well, but you know, I know what I saw. Not.
Well, so, what did you think of that scene?
It is. It reflects a lack of access and knowledge of what really was and who these people were. The acting was done well. Addington looks like Addington. Madeline kind of looks like Mary Madeline. Scooter doesn't quite look like Scooter. And Cheney does look like Cheney. I mean, the acting was superb, but the content, you know, when I got into the vice president's office, the first thing we were told is two things. Remember two things. One is we're the bridesmaid, we're not the bride. Number one. And number two, while yes, we have access to the intelligence, we don't have direct access to the president. That goes through Cheney, number one. And number two, and through Scooter to some extent, because Scooter was a senior, but the senior advisor and national security advisor of the vice president, the protocol issue, and it was in many other administrations. You have to remember, Cheney is the second highest elected official in the land. That is not an insignificant fact. That he is the only other official in the U.S. government that was elected in the executive branch, that it was elected to the position he holds. He has the mandate of the American people. That makes him inherently the second most powerful person if he does not exercise it or so. But that said, he said, first of all, remember we're the bridesmaid and not the bride. Two, despite our access to policy, always remember the 80% rule. If the policy is 80% what we as a group agree with, don't worry about the 20%. Let it go. Don't fight stupid fights. Only if you think that the policy is way off the rails, is fundamentally flawed, say something. Then say something. Say something in your emails to the National Security Council, so forth. But your job ultimately is advisory, because this is point 3. There's no bureaucracy to the vice president's office. When you were the national security advisor, when you were like me, that senior advisor on Middle East affairs, you had nobody working for you. Nobody. Your job was to be an advisor to the National Security Council and tell them what you thought and what the vice president thought, and maintain his policy, the vice president's policy. And then the National Security Council, based on the president, what was worked out between him, the president, Connie, whatever, they do what they do. They have bureaucracy. They're the ones who command, who writes the papers. For example, okay, we decided something. You, State Department, you take a first cut at the policy paper. They're the ones who manage the show. The Security Council was the ones who make sure that the political echelon of the US government's will is implemented, because the political echelon is the embodiment of the American people, not the bureaucracy. Two, that policy is run in an efficient, effective manner. In other words, managers. And three, to orchestrate the bureaucracies, mobilization for a policy. And four, to convene meetings where the bureaucratic heads meet to set policy. That was what the Security Council did. All we could do is weigh in. That's it. If we couldn't convince anybody, we had that much power.
But is it true that the Cheney people were sort of pros compared to like a Karen Hughes, some of the Bush people?
No, look, Karen Hughes I don't think she was where she should have been, because foreign policy was not her deal. But Karen Hughes could run political circles around any of us. So could Karl Rove. Look, Condoleezza Rice was the most trusted advisor to the president. Through her, Steve Hadley was the second most trusted. The president in the first term, much less after the election cycle began of the second term, not even after the election, before, in the election cycle, because they were each campaigning and they were in different cities all the time. The vice president's role was to counsel the president, to give him advice. That was it. The real core was Condi and Steve Hadley, and they had their structures. They had their ways of dealing with it. There was an inner circle. They didn't particularly like criticism. Cheney, on the other hand, you could tell him, and I did this in a couple memos. I remember going home that night and telling my wife, I'm going to get fired tomorrow, because my memo was a doozy. We are way off the rails. Our policy, and by the way, our policy, the vice president's office, I don't think we're doing it right. And to give Cheney credit, he would look at it, and more often than not, he'd say, you may be right. He was willing to change his mind if he felt that there was a good argument there. But again, there was an inner circle around the president, and Karl Rove was in the inner circle with Condi. So was Steve Hadley. So were some of the people on the National Security Council. So was some of the other echelons in the White House. Even on Iraq policy, there was a very narrow group surrounding Megan O'Sullivan, Dan Senor, who really were the power, not us. Even though we had a lot of expertise on Iraq and a lot of expertise on Shiism and Iran, we could only advise.
You should really see Vice. It's much better than Oliver Stone's
Yeah,
W.
I'll look at it.
The movie, if you're not aware, it claims basically a focus group. I mean, I have the scene right here if you want to see how they say the war was started.
No, it's okay.
Okay, I'll show. Yeah, and don't you want to see the actor that played you? They got Brad Pitt. No, you're not in. I'm joking.
Yeah, I did. I didn't think I was.
But this is how they say the war came about.
Someone up.
Got it. Mark, really strong feelings coming from Mark. I'm interested. Does anybody else feel the same? Or
they understand we're at war, but they don't know against who.
They want a country. It's cleaner, simpler.
That would certainly help us legally.
Well, looks like it's time to take a rack.
It is about goddamn time.
It's called the Office of Special Plans. Tenet is not yet serious enough about the threat that Saddam poses the global war on terror. But I can promise you that this intelligence group will be.
Wolfie, I got something.
Transmissions. If there's a donkey with a radio up its ass, I want to know what it's transmitting.
Oh, maybe you are in here. Actually, I'm wrong. Sorry. Briefly.
We want to take that motherfucker's thumb down for a long time.
Here's a report that says Mohammed Atta, one of the 9/11 hijackers, may have met with an Iraqi spy in Prague.
It's a really strong statement. Does anybody agree with that statement?
Wait a minute, we can't just bomb people.
Oh.
Yeah, no.
It's from Czech intelligence, and they question its credibility.
I've been to Prague. They question everything.
Who wants to be an anonymous source?
Make sure you work in the phrase, we don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud. That focus group through the roof.
There will always be uncertainty about when he will acquire nuclear weapons. But we don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud.
There is a smoking gun or a mushroom cloud.
Simply
We have waited
stated,
too long.
there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has
You
weapons
actually
of mass
might be in
destruction.
this group.
There's no doubt he's amassing them to use them against our friends, against our allies, and against us.
When Saddam creates and uses nuclear weapons, what will we tell the American people?
Saddam Hussein will continue to increase his capacity to wage biological and chemical warfare.
To show that we will stand up for what we know to be right. To show that we will confront the tyrannies and dictatorships and terrorists who put our way of life at risk.
Winning a second UN resolution authorizing the war against Iraq. So tonight, we'll go on the hopes of an oppressed people.
No, I mean, it's great fiction, but it's fiction. Nothing of that really resembles anything. I can tell you where Special Plans came from. It was September 11th at night. I went down to the Pentagon. I had been a Naval Reserve intelligence officer and still had all my passes to get into the building. So a guy called me in who worked for Doug Feith. And I went to his office and he said, "Come back tomorrow morning. We got something we got to talk about." And I went there the next morning. It was still burning. It was terrible. And they said, "Do you still have your clearances?" And I said, "Well, my clearances are still there, but I retired from the military 6 months ago. I went individual ready retirement, IRR. So the clearances are still active, but I don't have. I mean, my security clearance is active, but my access is not. The passwords on the computers and stuff are gone because I retired." So they said, "Is there a way you could resume that? We might have something for you to do." And I said, "Well, you have to talk to the head of DIA, CIA, et cetera, because they're the ones who control the access." And they organized it, and I got my clearances back, and I started as a contractor. They had the option maybe of calling me up because I was individual ready reserve, but they instead made me a civilian contractor or consultant or whatever they called it. And I remember I said, what is my mission?" And I remember Doug Feith and Paul Wolfowitz looking at me and saying, "I don't know. You'll figure it out. You know, we've just been hit. We don't even know who hit us. Go figure it out. Figure this out." So I was all dejected and I was like, what do I do here? And I went over Richard Pearl's house. And he was on the Defense Policy Board and mentor to Doug Feith and a close friend of Paul's. And because he was on the Defense Policy Board, he was aware of what I was going to do. And I said, "Richard, what do I do?" And he said, "Listen, when there's a big snowstorm and a whole bunch of people, thousands of people are socked in an airport, do you ever notice how eventually the musicians find the musicians and the professors of literature find the professors of literature and the physicists find the physicists? Everybody seems to find and they spend the time networking. We don't know what hit us. Wade into the world of terrorism and figure it out that way." So I went in the next day. I asked for a room. I got a room. I asked for a lot of paper. I had full access to all the intelligence. And it was like the movie A Beautiful Mind. I don't know if you remember that movie where the guy went crazy trying to find UFOs. So what I was doing was I'd have a piece of intelligence and I'd see a name and I'd put a dot and put the serial number of the intelligence. Then I'd see he traveled to, I don't know, Rome. And he stayed in a safe house of X organization. X organization was the next dot, a line. And what began to develop on my walls with very tiny writing was this vast universe. It looked like the solar system with thicker lines, thinner lines. And what you could see is the world network of terrorism developing in front of your eyes. Who was interacting with whom? And you realized a couple things. One is nobody is ever fully loyal to anybody. But two, there are some state patterns. They change over time. But there are some state patterns that sort of match when these things would happen. And it just meant that the state was in interaction with that terrorist group and knew how to use them. But there were a couple of very clear things. Sunnis worked with Shiites, secular worked with religious. The various key assumptions that had governed American policy were flawed. And they clouded our ability to understand what hit us. And so I started developing a PowerPoint projection to capture the main ideas. What I turned in, and this became the foundation for the Office of Special Plans. This was, quote, the Rogue Intelligence Operation. This was really called Special Policy Unit or something like that, which then became Special Plans. But what emerged from that was a 150-page PowerPoint, of which two pages tied in some form to the Iraqi government. 2 out of 150. 17, if I remember correctly, tied to Iran. If anything, Iran should have been the target, not Iraq. It did not produce a justification for Iraq. Did the Iraqi government know? I don't even know if they knew. Were they involved with terrorist groups that might have known and had some tangential or even partially more than tangential role? There seemed to be a little bit. Iran, same, much more. These terrorists interacted. You had Al-Qaeda staying with Abu Nidal. Al-Qaeda being, the arch Islamist terror, Abu Nidal being a communist. So you saw the interaction. So of course you were going to see everybody interacting with anybody. You saw a real evil swamp, a hydra of carnage, so to speak. And it was employable by various governments when they needed pieces of it. So that sort of led much more to the larger idea that we've got a bigger problem of the politics of the region, where the tyranny and the corruption and the evil, essentially, of these governments who suppress their people needed these structures to export their internal violence, to export their internal problems, to unify around the cause to justify their internal crushing. So if anything, it justified more the concept, ultimately. It justified the concept, ultimately, of maybe the war for freedom. But did it drive us into Iraq? Absolutely not. We weren't cynical at all. There was no focus groups. There was no, let's message it this way, blah, blah, blah. There was a genuine strategic concern for what had just hit us, and that we needed to deal with this problem, because if it isn't Iraq tomorrow, it would be Iran the next day, or Libya, or Syria, that we had paid enough of a price over too many years for the overflow of the violence of internal Arab politics, and that we have to now change the paradigm and change the whole way we do business.
So just for the 9/11 truthers, you and Dov Zakheim were not sitting in a room controlling the airplanes. It wasn't an inside job. Is that what are you saying?
No.
That Dov Zakheim was not running 9/11? Is that?
Look, I mean, they keep saying, when the Jews left the building ahead of time. Do you realize the disproportionate number of Jews who were killed on 9/11? I mean, exactly the amount of Jews you would expect to be killed who worked in those buildings were killed. It's just unreal. By the way, the Israelis did not like what we were doing either. The Israelis felt, they were like, why are you focused on Iraq? Why are you guys doing this stuff? You should be focused on Iran. Believe me, we did not have the support of the Israeli government. If anything, there was a lot of tension between us, the special plans, and then I left into the State Department shortly thereafter, and the special plans continued under Aide Shulsky, and the names were correct. But believe me, we were not liked by the Israelis in any shape or form.
Have you watched any of these 9/11 Truth documentaries, like Loose Change?
No.
Man.
I saw what the intelligence. I mean, we know who Al Qaeda was. I mean, it was very clear. I saw the intelligence.
No, I'm not saying they're right. I'm just curious.
No, I just can't. I mean, I know the conspiracy
Yeah.
theories. If you treat them as fiction, they're fun. And I'm in. Like I'll go see the movie you just showed me, even if I know it's wrong, because it's entertaining. I watch West Wing, even though that's not a very good representation. But just like doctors watched ER when it was around, they knew it wasn't quite.
I see Richard Pearl is still alive, so future episode idea. I want you, Richard Pearl, and we can watch a 9/11 Truth documentary.
Yeah, that would be. But look, I mean, it's entertaining. Yeah. But at the end of the day,
it's dangerous.
We were hit by what it's seen. What you see is what we got. That it's pretty much straightforward. Yeah. Who Al Qaeda was and who they worked with and what they represent, and larger questions. That's still something that really deserves some more analysis and attention. But what you see is what you got. It was. I was as surprised as everybody that morning. I was sitting in my bedroom getting ready to go downtown to my office. I was still not in government yet. And my wife said, come up here, something's happened, terrible. I go up, I see on the TV that there's a burning tower. She said a plane flew into it. And I looked at it and I said, that's not a small plane. That's not an accident. That's a big commercial airliner flew into that. That doesn't just happen. Not the World Trade Center. I mean, So I was instantly thinking, this is hanky-panky. Maybe somebody committed suicide, etc. And then the second one is we're watching hit. And I was like, well, 2 planes. That somebody's attacking us. So for me, it was so instantly I thought, you know what? I'm going to be called up. I might as well preempt it. I'm just going to put on my uniform, going to go down. I know I'm going to be called up. So what's the point of waiting? So I put on my uniform. I start walking down the steps, and my wife says, you got to come back up here. You can't go. And I said, why? Because the Pentagon's been hit. And this is where rationality flees. I looked at her and said, no, that can't be. I'm headed to the Pentagon. How can it be hit? As if rationality, it's whatever. Believe me, it was as surprising for all of us as it was for every American. Yeah, and it's depressing and it's horrifying.
I'll just summarize. It's funny what happened with the 9/11 Truth Movement, so-called 9/11 Truth Movement, in quotations. First, it started out with Bush-led happen, but the planes were real. A few years later, there were no planes. It was a directed energy attack. Then there was a big civil war between they would call each other the no planers and the planers, and then it got more evolved. It was I looked up one last night. I was looking for something, and it got more sophisticated. It was actually they had the missile hit that part of the Pentagon because those people were looking for the trillions of dollars that the Bush people had stolen. So that they killed the people looking for it. I mean, it got really creative.
One thing I can, just as a rule of thumb, say to the truthers, were that the American government were that capable. I think incompetence is always the default to explain almost everything in the U.S. government. I've dealt with too much. It's a huge bureaucracy. There's a lot of people with different interests. Everybody's playing everybody. Go watch some of the Shakespeare plays like Henry V or Richard III, or go see some of the great literature of political, or go read Thucydides or even Suetonius from the Romans. Believe me, it's a mess. It's a horrible, horrible mess. And conspiracies are really difficult because people try to scheme because people are pretty narcissistic and they think they can do it. It's not that people aren't scheming. They get away with anything for real on a large scale, government wide. It's impossible. Too much incompetence.
Yeah, I mean that's the flattering aspect of anti-Semitism. They had to. Jews, the Israelis are so amazing. They could do this in another country, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, right after the war, after I left government in 2008, 2009, 2010, I went to New York. I wanted to be a consultant for some firms, for financial firms or so forth. Consulting, doing political work, analyzing the Middle East for them. And one guy obviously was very far to the left, and he was very upset by us going to war in Iraq. And he was saying, "You did this, and you did that, and you did this, and you did that, and you got us into this war." And I remember at a certain point, I just couldn't argue with him anymore. It was irrational. And I just looked at him and I said, "Well, look, I mean, if I'm really that powerful, then you should hire me. I mean, really, if I can make 2 wars happen from a position 4 or 5 levels below the president, then you should hire me. I'm pretty effective." What can you do?